Hello fellow hikers, I'm T-Rex, and as an ultralight hiker, knowing the efficiency of your stove and pot choice can arm you with the knowledge needed to make a decision on how much fuel to bring. For example, if you're like most hikers, this knowledge will help you decide between bringing a full 110 gram canister or a full 120 gram canister. If you're a bit of an extremist, like me, then this knowledge will help you decide between which of these three empty canisters you'll bring and how much fuel you're going to put in them using an adapter like this. Either way, the ultimate goal of both these parties is to minimize the amount of fuel you'll be carrying for a trip. So today, I want to talk about stove and pot efficiency, propose a new way of measuring it going forward, and introduce you to a calculator I made to assist with this new method. This calculator not only compares efficiency of dissimilar systems accurately, but also calculates for you how many grams of fuel you need to bring on a trip using inputs like altitude, source water temperature, volume of water boiled per day, and the number of days spent on the trail. So let's get started. Now, I'd argue there are two main ways I've seen people measure the efficiency of their cook systems on YouTube and other different social sharing websites. The first is what I would call the boil time method. With this method, you measure the amount of time it takes to boil a given volume of water. If you know the total runtime of your stove on a given fuel can, you can then calculate how many boils that particular fuel can give you. The benefit of this method is that it's simple and needs no special tools to do, just a stopwatch app on your phone and a spare fuel can to burn through. The downside is that because each stove has a different flow rate through it, it is only good for comparing pots against other pots in terms of efficiency using the same stove at the same output setting, and it does not allow you to compare against other stoves. In addition to this, environmental factors may change exactly how long each boil takes, and so you can't even use it to compare the same stove that someone has used with a different pot in a different environment. It also doesn't give you a reliable estimate on how much fuel you could bring, because if you're going to a different environment, it will change how long your boil time will be. Now, the second method is a little better, and we'll go over that next. The second and better method, in my opinion, is the fuel consumption per boil method. With this method, you boil a given volume of water and weigh how much fuel was used to boil that volume. I used this method in my last video to compare the Jewel Thief pot that I made against the Jetboil Stash pot and the Toke's 550 milliliter pot. Because you are measuring the fuel consumption per boil, this method allows you to compare different stove systems against each other with the same pot, or completely different stove and pot combinations to get an idea of which is most efficient and or better suits your cooking needs for a given trip duration. There are cons to this system though, I should say method, not system, and using this method is basically only helpful for you as an individual to compare the gear you have on hand, because different environmental factors play a significant role in determining the fuel consumption of a given system. This is perfectly shown in Far Out Guide's wonderful review of the Jetboil Stash. But you can see here that they measured 3.6 grams of fuel burned to boil 2 cups of water. Yet in my last video, I got 4.3 grams to boil 2 cups of water on the Jetboil Stash. That's nearly a 20% difference. What gives? Well, the prime suspect is something called vapor pressure. You don't have to know what it is, you just have to know that because of this thing, water actually boils at lower temperatures the higher in elevation you go. On top of that, the starting temperature of water is important too. Water that comes out of the tap at 60 degrees will consume more energy to reach boiling than water that comes out of the tap at 70 degrees for the same elevation. So the takeaway is that measuring boiling is the flaw, because different people require more or less energy to reach boiling depending on their environment. This also means that what you measure at home may not be representative of what you experience on the trail, thus potentially leading to a scenario where you run out of fuel a little prematurely. So next I want to go over the method that I propose for measuring and comparing systems. So what is my proposed metric for efficiency? Well, I think we should start measuring pot and stove combination efficiency in terms of energy absorbed by the pot per gram of fuel burned by the stove, or in other words, what I'm calling the joules per gram method. What are the benefits? Well, it's not dependent on a constant source water temperature across all tests. It's also not dependent on a constant altitude across all tests, and it's not dependent on the volume of water being heated across all tests. Thus, it truly allows people from across the globe to collectively compare different systems with one another and make accurate predictions on fuel consumption on the trail. Now, the downsides is that it needs a little more equipment. You're going to need a kitchen scale, and you're going to need a kitchen thermometer capable of measuring up to 250 degrees Fahrenheit or 120 degrees Celsius, just to give you a little wiggle room. It doesn't have to be a fancy one like this, it just has to be one of those turkey thermometers or something like that. So next, let's show you how to take these measurements and then enter them into the calculator. Okay, so obviously you need your pot and your stove and fuel. Make sure your stove is already attached to your fuel before you do this step. And we're going to turn on our kitchen scale. I'm going to set it to grams, and we're going to weigh our stove and fuel can together, looking at 314.8 grams. Write it down. And then next you're going to put your pot on the kitchen scale, and you're going to zero it out, or tare it, or tar it. I honestly don't know how to pronounce it, but we're going to zero it out, so it says 0, so I'm at 0.0 grams. Take the pot off, add the volume of water. It doesn't really matter what volume of water you use with this method, it'll work either way. There is a caveat though. Skinny pots like this are less efficient the more volume of water you boil in them. That probably has something to do with the ratio between volume of water and surface area of the bottom of the pot. So just keep that in mind. I would personally just put in the volume of water you're most likely to use per given boil while you're on the trail. For me, that's 475 milliliters or 2 cups. So next we're going to take our cup with the volume of water, put it on the scale that was zeroed out, and we got 463 grams of water. 463 grams of water. Let me cross these out. Okie dokie. And there we go. You put the kitchen scale, I guess the kitchen scale can stay here. Let's put this on top of the stove, center it. And then next we want to turn on our kitchen thermometer. So I have mine set in Celsius. You're gonna need to take your temperature readings in Celsius, or if you take them in Fahrenheit, make sure you convert them to Celsius before entering them into the calculator. And I'll show you how to do that later. So let's take our probe and pan up so you can actually see what's going on. Take our probe, put it in the water, and we're gonna wait about a minute to let both the temperature probe, the water, and the cup all each reach thermal equilibrium so that they're at the same temperature and doesn't mess with our measurements. So let's wait a second. And then while we're waiting, I'm gonna go over my notes over here and make sure I'm not forgetting anything. Okay, looks like we're good to proceed. So I'm at 21 degrees Celsius. I'm going to write that down as our initial starting temperature, 21 degrees C. And then now we're going to turn the stove on. I haven't measured the stove yet. This is why I'm using this particular stove for this video, because I also get to input it and see how it compares with other stoves. I'm currently testing a bunch of different types of stoves with my pot. And I'm curious to see how this one performs, because this is generally the most efficient stove to be used with non-heat exchanger pots. But for some reason, when it comes to heat exchangers, it doesn't perform that much better than other systems. So it's important that you set the output of your stove to the output you'll be using on the trail. And that's because the higher the output you set your stove to, the less efficient it's going to be at boiling a given volume of water, because it's just allowing more heat to escape the pot without it transferring that heat to the pot. And so that's something to keep in mind while you're on the trail as well. If you're tight on fuel and you're trying to make it last, just have longer boil times by decreasing the output of your stove. I personally like to do 20%, and it's important that across all your tests at home, you're making sure that you have the output of your stove the same. Because if you don't, you're going to get different efficiency readings. So I've set that. Once again, I'm going to review my notes while that's on before I fast forward on this, just to make sure I'm not missing anything. Ah, yes, good thing I checked that. Okay, so it's important here that you don't let this reach boiling, because Once it reaches boiling, the stove will be putting joules into the pot that are no longer going towards increasing the temperature, and we're measuring the temperature differential. And so by doing that, you'll have more joules that were burned that aren't accounted for in your calculations. So what you want to do is you want to do a trial run before you do your experimental run. And in your trial run, you're going to want to see what temperature water boils in your environment. Record that, and then when you go to actually do your experimental run, you want to turn the stove off 5 degrees before that you hit that temperature. That way you're not wasting any joules that aren't going to contribute to raising the temperature of the water. Because it's the increase in temperature change of the water that allows us to measure how many joules are being absorbed by the pot. And now I'm just going to fast forward until we get to the appropriate temperature. For me, it's going to be 93 degrees, and I'll stop there. I'm going to shut the stove off. Jumped up to 94 for a split second, hovering at 93, going back down to 92. Okay, so let's do 93 degrees, write it down, is the end temperature, 93 degrees Celsius. Let's take the temperature probe out. And then we need to measure our stove fuel consumption. So let's put this on here, and we have 300 and let's see. Oops, my bad. 310.1 grams. Alrighty. So now we have all the metrics that we recorded that we need to do the calculation. And there's two choices you have for getting the joules per gram metric. The first thing you could do is you could perform the calculation yourself using this equation. Or you could use the calculator I made, and I have a link to in the description. And so let's go to the calculator and show you how to do that. So this is our calculator. I do apologize if you've used Google Sheets before, because I'm going to go a little slow and pretend like you haven't, for those who truly haven't. But Google Sheets is essentially like Excel or something like that. You have these rows and these columns, and inside these, they're called cells, you could enter values, or you could have them be equations that are dependent on values of other cells. And so that's how I basically made this thing. Now here, if it's highlighted in red, it's a calculator. There's two of them here. This is the calculator we'll be concentrating on at first, because this is the calculator for stove and pot combo efficiency. I've already entered the name, but if you click on the link and you open up this Google Sheet, you're going to be entering the name of your stove system. I'm just calling this the Joule Thief and Soda Windmaster. That's what we just tested. Our starting temperature was 21 degrees Celsius. Our end temperature was 93 degrees Celsius. Our water weight was, let me go grab the paper real quick, I can't remember. Okay, so this is our calculator. If you just open this up and this is your first time seeing Google Sheets, I'm gonna go a little slow so I could just try to help you out and understand what's going on here. For those of you who totally know how to use Google Sheets, dive in, have fun, and tell me what you think. So the calculator here is highlighted in a red box, and there's a calculator on the right also highlighted in a red box. That's a different calculator. I'll show you that one in a second. But if it's blue, it's an input for you. And Google Sheets works off of rows and columns. And where the rows and columns intersect, you have a cell. A cell could be entered. You can enter a value into a cell, or you can enter a formula into a cell that's dependent on values of other cells. So what we just did, here, let me delete these, is we just did the Joule Thief and Soto Windmaster stove. Now, if you have a different stove and pot system combination, you'll enter something like Toke's 650 milliliter with what stove should I, let me think, like a Snow Peak, like a we call it the Gigamax or Gigalight, like that, something like that. But we just did this stove and pot combination, and so that's what our metrics are on. So we're going to go ahead and enter that. Now, the idea here is I have all these blank ones, and I'm hoping that people download this and start entering other stoves and pot combinations in here, so we could have a collection of different efficiencies to compare and weights as well. So first thing we got to do is enter the start temperature. We just did oh, that's wrong. Here we go. The Joule Thief. That's what we want to do. We just did the Joule Thief with the Soto Windmaster. Our initial temperature was 21 degrees Celsius. Our end temperature was 93 degrees Celsius. Our water weight was 463 grams. Oh, that's really close to this one. And then our fuel burned. And so this is what's cool about Google Sheets is let's just double click. And then if you press equal, it then turns into kind of like a formula. And so what we did was we had 314.8 grams was our initial weight of our stove and fuel canister. And then after the burn, the weight was 310 grams, 310.1 grams. And then you just press enter and it automatically propagates that cell with that value. And then you'll notice over here, instead of getting that divide by zero error, we're actually looking at the efficiency now. And this is in terms of joules per gram of fuel. And so this is kind of cool, right? And so we see here, kind of like how I predicted, the Soto Windmaster, for whatever reason, is not very well with heat exchanger pots. Compared to other stoves. So like, look at this BRS 3000T up here that I tested earlier. And I did like 5 different trials with this stove. So this test is pretty accurate. This was only one trial. I need to do more trials to make it a little more accurate. So to get that variance down. But with the BRS 3000T, the Joule Thief is absorbing 39,000 joules per gram, 39.5 kilojoules per gram of fuel, which is really impressive. The Jetboil Stash right here with the Stash stove that comes with it absorbs 33.7 kilojoules per gram of fuel. And so this is your output, right? This is what you could use to compare, and that's kind of neat. Now on the right we have base weight. Base weight is measured in grams. You're going to make sure, and for all these, make sure you enter the appropriate unit of measurement because it will mess up the equations if you don't. Now, if it has a little orange tab up here, that means there's a comment, and if you put your cursor over there, you can read the comment. And basically, these are instructions on what to do and how to use it. I plan to add more comments to the calculator on the right. But let's go ahead, now that you know how to use this, let's go ahead and scoot on over to the calculator on the right. So here we have it, this calculator up top. And what this calculator does is it uses a stove system inputted over here, and then other inputs that are for an upcoming trip you're going to do. So you're going to input the elevation you expect to be at, the starting temperature of the water for your boils you expect, the volume of water you expect to boil per day, and the amount of days that you expect to be out on your trip. And this is a trip fuel calculator. This will calculate how much fuel you're going to need for a given trip. And the outputs over here are 2 types. So you have mild outputs, which are in pink. Mild outputs are just used to guide you basically in your inputs. So like the start temperature or the elevation, input elevation is in meters, but whenever, oh, let's go back. Whenever you adjust this, let's go ahead and just do like 3,000 or something. It automatically adjusts the elevation in feet on the right to help guide you in case you're not familiar with metric units. And same with the Celsius, it has the Fahrenheit on the right to help guide you.
So right now, this is kind of set for the Sierras. So let's do 2750, and that's about 9,000 feet. And so that will automatically propagate down below as well. And what I mean by down below is you could compare two stove systems at a time, or two cook systems at a time. But let's just concentrate on the inputs for the top one first. And so you enter your volume of water per day as well that you plan to boil, and how many days you're going to be out there for, right? And then on the right, your outputs in yellow are going to be your total weights for your system. Right here, this pink output tells you how many grams of fuel you're going to burn for that trip, basically. And this calculation on the left is for filling canisters. So if you're a bit of an extremist like me and you're filling your own canisters with the exact amount of weight of fuel that you got from the calculator on the left for your trip, plus some safety margin, this is the total weight of your system for that trip. It includes the weight of your pot, your stove, the weight of the fuel canister that's needed to carry this amount of fuel. So if it's over 220 grams, if it's over 110 grams, it will automatically add the weight of the larger canister instead. Over here is what most hikers will probably use. This is for people who buy their cans full, or that are already full, essentially. And so what this will do is this will pop out the weight of the stove, the pot, basically the base weight of your cook kit that you entered on the efficiency calculator, plus the weight of the canister and plus the weight of a full canister that's required for that trip. For a 9-day trip, it looks like with this system, it's probably going to be a 220. Oh, that's probably a 10. No, that looks like a 10 gram canister. Yeah, a 110 gram canister. Yeah, see, it totally is, because a 220 gram canister would be 400 and something grams. Anyways, so that brings me back down to the numbers we have down here. The graphs we have down here. So there's two sets of graphs. You have the left set and the right set. The left set is measuring this is going to be hard for me to explain. I'm not very good at words, but the left set is telling you how much your system will weigh at day one of a trip of given length, right? And so if you have a trip that's going to be 3 days, this is how much your system will weigh plus the fuel on day one. If you have a trip of 6 days, this is how much your system will weigh on day one. And what you see here, this graph on the top is for buying cans full. You're buying your fuel cans already full of fuel. And you see that it's a step function. Because of the efficiency of the joule thief over a non-heat exchanger pot, it goes back and forth between which one's the lighter one or not. Because there are scenarios where the included efficiency allows you to maintain the weight of the smaller can, while with the other one, you would have had to jump up to the larger can and weight. And so this works like a step function. Down here is for people who are a little insane like myself, and they're custom filling the canisters themselves. And this still has some step function type behavior, but you'll see that, like I said in my last video, because of the efficiency of the joule thief, it's almost always lighter, except for the 1-day trip scenario. It's always lighter to bring versus the Toke's 550. And that's because when you're custom filling, you can save weight by the efficiency of the stove because you don't need as much fuel. And this works as a step function because it's linear until you require a larger fuel can, then it bumps up like a step function, and then it's a linear function again of fuel consumption, right? And the cool thing about these graphs is that these automatically propagate and change based off of your inputs. So let's say my volume of water changes to only 2 per day. I'm gonna do that down here too. Let's do 2 per day. And then let's say the trip duration changes to 6 days. Now the trip duration won't affect this graph, but it will affect the graphs on the right. And you'll see that when I entered these graphs automatically propagated and changed to the new inputs. And this just shows you how complicated these problems can be And this makes it simple so you're not crunching numbers all day. If you change the start temperature to like 3 degrees Celsius, you see that it changes the consumption rates, right? And so it's pretty cool how this works. Let's also go 3 here, right? And that changes. And so that's kind of cool, right? Drop this back to 15 and 15. Now, some of these are coupled, like the elevation is coupled. Whatever you enter on the top, it automatically propagates to the one on the bottom. The ones that are not coupled are volume by water and the start temp. The volume by water is not coupled because let's say you're using something like a bot, a Vargo bot, which allows you to cold soak, right? And so if you're not cold soaking, if you're using like a Toast 350, you would have to do 3 boils a day. Where if a bot, you could have your lunch be a cold soak, and then your breakfast and your dinner is a hot meal, and you also have another boil for tea and coffee, right? And so that allows you to compare 2 different systems that also are dissimilar in the amount of boils you do. Let's change this though back to 3 days so everything is consistent. Let me make sure everything's consistent. Okay, now let me explain the graphs on the right. So these graphs are a little different. These represent weight carried per day that you're out. So this is number of days on trail, not how many days of a trip length you're taking. So this graph up top, once again, represents buying cans that are already full. So if you're going out for 6 days, you'll see that on the 6th day, you still have fuel in your can, right? Because if you continued on for 10 days, you would still be burning fuel. Once you run out of fuel, your weight of your system remains constant because you're no longer burning fuel. Now down here, you'll see that, oops, let me go here. You'll see that for people who are filling their own canisters, they run out of fuel on the day that they entered up here, right? Because it's telling you how much fuel you got to put to fill your canister up with. So naturally, you'll run out on that day, and then the graph goes flat after that. For people who are buying, this is a great way of showing how much extra weight you'll be carrying beyond the date that you're going. Now, these two also self-propagate based off of the values you put up here. So let's say we're going to do 4 days. 4 days. And then you get an example where it's not always that simple, right? Because the initial weight of the Joule Thief system is lighter on the first day. But because of how inefficient a non-heat exchanger pod is, it very fastly catches up by day 2. And then for the remaining 2 days, you're carrying less weight on average. And so this is how complicated the system can be, of like the question of which stove you should bring. And I think this calculator really is something that's kind of fascinating in showing or just arming you with the knowledge to make decisions. And it will definitely probably create analysis paralysis, and diving this much detail into something like this is definitely not needed. But I like this kind of thing, and it's kind of my hobby, so that's what I did. Anyways, I hope you like it. Play around with it. Let me know what you think. Please don't break it. I think I've locked all the cells that shouldn't have people messing with them. But if you see something that you think needs changing, let me know, and I'll be sure to update it. Thanks for watching, guys. I really appreciate it.